Hello, the stream. Oh, where are my headphones? We're working on an audiobook today. Oh boy. All right. No, that's not gonna work, is it? Oh, no problem, Lauren. Good to see you again. How you doing? Hooray for writing.
Legacy Books presents Shadeborn, a book of Underrealm, Book 4 of the Nightblade Epic. Find all the works of Underrealm at underrealm.net/books. Written and narrated by Garrett Robinson. Legacy Books presents Shadeborn, a book of Underrealm, Book 4 of the Nightblade Epic. Find all the works of Underrealm at underrealm.net/books. Written and narrated by Garrett Robinson. Chapter 1. What a dick.
Hey, thanks for the sub, Bodegazilla. Appreciate that.
Legacy Books presents Shadeborn, a book of Underrealm, Book 4 of the Nightblade Epic. Find all the works of Underrealm at underrealm.net/books. Written and narrated by Garrett Robinson.
Oh, well, that's interesting. You know what? F it. We're doing it. Here we go. Now, why are you doing this to me? Why? Oh, why? Hey, thanks for the follow, Sir Buffalo Knight. Good to see you again. Okay, so that's doing what it's supposed to do. Why? Oh, if only it were a plot choice. Audio tech is way more fiddly than anything I've ever dealt with in writing. Hey Google, stop.
Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Chapter 5.
Is it nap time yet? Oh. It's not right now, but I will definitely be napping to this afternoon. Sounds amazing.
Chapter 6. They set out into the... Chapter 7. Chapter 8. They did not stop their mad ride when they reached the trees, but they had to when the sun went down. Lauren scarcely noticed, and it was Zane who finally called them to a halt. She did not understand for a moment, and she looked at him in confusion. It was Chet who spoke first. She did not understand. To a halt. She did not understand for a moment, and she looked. And she looked.
Oh, Bodegazilla, you gotta make a world Bible.
And for a moment, and she looked at him in confusion. It was Chet who spoke first. Moons will not rise for hours, Lauren. His voice trembled. We can ride by their light if we must, but pressing on now is... But pressing on now is folly. Lauren stared a moment longer before she heard the words. Then she nodded and slid from the saddle, letting midnight wander. And slid from the saddle, letting from the saddle, letting midnight, letting mid saddle, letting midnight wander. She set off through the trees, away from the others, eyes wide to catch every mote of starlight and avoid a stumble. But she did not see the forest around her. Rather, she saw only a ghostly and wispy aspect of it, just enough for her feet to avoid upturned roots and stones. Instead of the trees and the silvery starlight, she saw Albern's charge, and Mag's skin covered in wounds, and Sten's slashed throat. It was some time before she could muster her thoughts. When she did, she realized she had wandered far from where the others had stopped. She turned to retrace her steps, and when she found their camp again, they had started a small fire beneath the trees. Part of her wanted to douse it, to keep them hidden in case they were pursued. But she could not muster the strength to care for so small a thing. Chet sat alone, outside the fire's light. His knees were pulled up against his chest, and his arms lay across them. He seemed to be looking at the firelight, but his gaze was far away, as though he saw nothing at all. A sharp pang in her gut reminded her she had not eaten for hours. She went to Midnight's saddlebag to fetch some meat and bread. Something went clink as she opened the saddlebag. Her brow furrowed. When she lifted the flap, she saw a small coin purse. It was her spare, the one she had given to Mag to pay for the horse. Slowly she untied the strings and poured the contents into her hand. 10 gold weights sat there, gleaming in the firelight. She stared at them for a while. Then she put them back in the purse, and put the purse in the saddlebag. Her appetite had vanished, so she closed the bag. Her appetite had vanished, so she closed the bag again and went to sit by the fire. But by the time she reached it, she did not want to rest, so she kept walking past it and over to Chet. She had nearly reached him before he noticed her and looked up. "You should eat," he said. "I suppose I should, too." "I tried. Will you walk with me?" He shrugged and stood. Together they went back into the darkness. Only to her surprise, Lauren found it easier to see, and she realized with a start that the moons had risen. She had spent more time alone than she thought. Chet stopped and heaved a shuddering breath. When she looked to him, she saw his shoulders shaking gently. She laid her hand on his back and turned him around. Once he faced her again, she saw his cheeks wet with tears. "They did not even seem to care who they killed," he said. "I saw children fall beneath their blades." "So it often is when armies sack cities," said Lauren. "Or so I have heard. I was there for the Battle of Wellmont, but the city held. There was no killing in the streets." He looked away and cleared his throat. When he spoke again, she could hear him trying to sound carefree, as though his tears were not there. "You all hardly blinked as you rode through it," he said. "I thought I would die of fright." "We have seen killing before," said Lauren. "Some of us more than others." "I am sorry about Albert. I knew him only a few days, but he seemed to have a good heart. Mag and Sten as well." "They did," said Lauren. He swiped a hand across his eyes, but tried to make it seem like he was only wiping sweat from his brow. "Lauren, we must get away from here. We should ride into Dorsey and vanish where no one will find us. If that army came to Northwood looking for you, and was willing to sack the city just to find you, they will not stop pursuing you now. That is why we must ride east, to warn the mystics of their coming." "Will they not expect that?" said Chet. "Will they not hunt us all along the road?" "That does not matter," said Lauren. "It is the duty I have taken upon myself. I have been hunted before." "Duty?" said Chet. His voice had gone high and hysterical. "Why would you wish this upon yourself? I thought to travel with you, not die beside you." Oh, I know that all the 9 lands may be dangerous, but this is another thing altogether. Did you not spend enough time unhappy and trapped by your parents out of some misplaced sense of duty? That was nothing I chose, said Lauren. But this is my life now. It has been almost since the moment I left the Birchwood. Doom.
Hey, thanks for the host, Lauren. Appreciate that.
I left the Birchwood. Doom follows in my footsteps. That is why I urged you not to come with us. Even now I urge you to turn away, to let your tracks lead you home. He stood there, looking at her.
Birchwood Roads. Take me home.
He stood there, looking at her in fear, and with a sinking heart she realized he was considering it. But at last he looked away and shook his head. No, I said I would come with you. Who could call me anything but faithless if I turned away because the road grew dark? Who cares what anyone would call you, said Lauren. I would happily have you by my side, but I would rather see you safe. And I you, he said. That is why we should go, and now, let others tend to duty.
God damn it, Lauren. Ha!
To duty. You and I have spent all our lives as its victims.
I haven't seen this clip in a while.
You clipped my lucky charms. You clipped my lucky charms.
No, it's bad. It's bad. Ha! 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 Oh, dear. Oh, no.
Our lives as its victims. I cannot, she said in a small voice. I owe it to him, to Jordell. Chet looked as if he might say more, but then her stomach gave a gurgle. He stopped, collected himself, and shook his head. We should eat. The road will grow darker still if we find ourselves starving upon it. I said I am not hungry. Hungry or not, I think you can swallow. Come.
I wrote this book. I edited this book. I edited this book again. And again. I proofread this book. And then I recorded the audiobook. And not until this moment did I see anything wrong with the line, "Hungry or not, I think you can swallow. Come."
Hungry or not, I think you can swallow. Come. They made their way back to the firelight. By the time they reached it, Chet seemed to have shaken off the darkness in his mind. Lauren wondered if it had been so easy for her the first time. When she had first seen men killed in anger, it had been with the merchant caravan where she had met Annis. Annis's mother, the merchant Damaris, had ordered a company of constables to be killed to preserve the secrecy of the goods she was smuggling. Lauren remembered her horror at the senseless slaughter, at how the merchant had forced her to help dig graves for all the bodies. But looking back on it now, she hardly blinked at the thought of the constables dying. She had seen so much since then, so much worse, so much more frightening. And yet she could not banish from her mind what had happened during the battle. She had chosen her target, and then had hesitated. The thought of her father's corpse had flashed into her mind, and the shot had gone wide. Maya, if she had been able to fire the arrow. But such thoughts were ridiculous. There had been scores of shades. Her arrow would not have made a difference. All the arrows in her quiver would not have made a difference. Yet mayhap she could have done something. For one brief, thrilling moment, she had meant to charge.
God Damn it, Bodegazilla! You fucking ass!
Yet mayhap she could have done something. For one brief, thrilling moment, she had meant to...
Hey, what's up, mummy movie?
For one brief, thrilling moment, she had meant to charge in and rescue Mag by whatever means she could. She knew, looking back on it, she would not have hesitated to spill blood. That prospect terrified her, and yet it made her wonder again. Why did she still hold so tightly to that ideal when she had already taken a life? That was different, she told herself. Jem and Annis had eaten already, and lounged at the fire's edge while staring into its heart. Lauren had not seen Zane touch his food, but then the wizard's appetite did not seem very great these days. He, too, watched the flames, but every few seconds he would look... Hungry or not, I think you can swallow. Come. Hungry...
Fucking... no...
great these days. He, too, watched the flames, but every few seconds he would look over his shoulder into the darkness beyond their camp.
Oh man, that's so cool, mummy movie. Ah, geez, Mama Samu's awesome. Can't wait to work with her again.
When he saw Lauren and Chet return, his eyes flashed with interest. Good, he said. We must discuss what we plan to do next. I myself am most curious about that, said Jem. We have made our escape, and a narrow one, but what now? We must warn the mystics, said Lauren. We know that, said Annis. But where do we mean to go? South to Cabris? The High King's seat? I do not relish either of those choices, for my family would be thick about us. And you will remember that even Jordell did not trust all those of his order. How will we know the right red cloaks to speak to, and which ones will ignore our warnings to hang us as criminals instead? If you will remember, Jordell told us where he meant to go, said Zane. His stronghold of Ammon, in Feldamar. He told me where it lies, and that is where I think we must lay our course. His master lives there, a man named Kau, of the family Endil. And you think this man can be trusted? Said Lauren. Have you met him? I trust few, mystics least of all, said Zane. But this, at least, we owe Jordell, to deliver his message to his master, and let the mystics do what they may with the tale. But how shall we get there? Said Lauren. I have scarcely any idea how to make our way to Feldamar. I know only that it is north and east of Selvin. A far ways north and east, yes, said Zane. Ammon is somewhat near the northern shore of the Great Bay. I visited that kingdom once in my youth. Ships travel there from all ports on the bay, and I took passage on a vessel from the High King's seat. The King's Road, then? Bay. I visited that kingdom once in my youth. Ships travel there from all ports on the bay, and I took passage on a vessel from the High King's seat. The King's Road, then? Said Jem. We could take it to the seat, or Garsek, Selvin's capital. That would be like walking into the lion's den, cried Annis.
We would certainly be spotted, and then I would be taken by my family. The rest of you would not be so lucky. You would likely take long in the killing." "No, Garsek and the Seat seem poor choices both," said Zane. "But there are other ports in Selvin, ports farther south along the bay, from where we might sail. But traveling there would take a long while, and the voyage would be longer besides. No, I think we must sail from Dorsey." Lauren blinked, gawking at him in the firelight. "Dorsey? Have Maidstones addled your mind so much, wizard? They are at war with Selvin, and no safe place for us to wander, especially since, as you have all pointed out so carefully, I speak like a child of Selvin birth. Chet is from my village, and most likely has the same accent." "Yes," said Jem and Annis at once. "Accent?" said Chet. "That was true enough when we..."
I really love the Birchwood kids' confusion over the fact that they have an accent. What accent? I speak as plainly as any other.
"That was true enough when we set out from Wellmont," said Zane. "But now the war is far away, in the southwest corner of the kingdom. Likely those in the northeast of Selvin have hardly heard of the fighting. Citizens of Dorsey will be even less concerned, so far away from the conflict. And so close to the border between the two kingdoms, we will find many families..."
Well, I'll tell you one secret about that Mummy movie. I'm the narrator, so it's not as weird.
"And so close to the border between the two kingdoms, we will find many families with both Selvin and Dortian kin. Your quaint voices will scarcely bear mention." "So that is our plan, then?" said Annis. "We will strike north into Dorsey, then travel east until we reach the coast? I dare say I like it better than the thought of riding to the Seat, where, if I have my way, I will never set foot again in this life. It seems where, if I have my way, I will never set foot again in this life."
That clicky clicky.
"My way, I will never set foot again in this life. I will never set foot again in this life." "It seems a prudent course," said Jem. Chet's eyes lit up, and he turned to Lauren.
It does, honestly. I was a voice actor for a while, and it just... I don't have a big thing on it, honestly. I was probably only able to get into voice work at all because I don't have that thing where my voice sounds super weird to me. The only thing about my voice that sounds super weird to me, which I've gotten over, is that my S's sound weird. They sound more sibilant in my head than when I hear them recorded. Other than that, my voice just sounds like my voice to me. You know, a lot of people are like, "Oh, when I hear my voice recorded, it sounds so bad." And I'm like, sounds like my voice to me. I don't have a big thing on hearing it or reading it or anything like that.
Mayhap there is another way. Traveling across the open country of Dorsey poses its own dangers, and we do not know the land. But there is another road to the coast of the Great Bay, and it is a road for which we already have 2 guides. Lauren caught his meaning at once. "The Birchwood." "What of it?" said Jem. "It runs all the way to the bay."
That's hilarious, Mummy.
"And Chet and I know it well. Mayhap we are not woodsmen so great as..." She stopped short, just before she said Albern. "As some others. But this is our home. I do not think the shades can follow us beneath these trees." "If there is one thing we should have learned by now, it is not to underestimate our foes," said Zane darkly. "Think of this. The shades attacked Northwood from the west, but also from the north. They have been gathering in strength, much greater strength than we knew. Where did they all come from? They did not conjure so many soldiers from thin air. They are men and women of these lands, of Selvin and Dorsey and likely other kingdoms besides. And if they know we have fled into the forest, they will send trackers after us who know it as well as the 2 of you." "You think any Selvins fight on their side?" said Lauren angrily. You think they would march into one of their own cities and murder their fellows in the streets? Huh, I think you know little of our kingdom. And you think too highly of your fellows, snapped Zane. Mayhap they were starving, and the Shades gave them coin. Mayhap their homes were ravaged by war, and the Shades offered them safety. Mayhap they were dying from plague, and the Shades provided refuge. And mayhap their suffering was not at the hands of some whimsical fate, but their fellow citizens of Selvin. Do you think, then, that they would stay their blades? Lauren fumed, though in the back of her mind she knew she had little reason for it. She had met evil people before. Few acted as they did for the joy of it. She turned away from Zane, refusing to answer him. Chet frowned, but spoke to appease the wizard rather than to argue. Still, we have a lead. I think we can evade them, and in any case, it would let Lauren and me return home. If the Shades do indeed wander these lands, we owe it to our families to warn them. He stopped short, glancing at Lauren from the corner of his eye. And to our other friends, of course. Lauren turned to see Zane's dark eyes fixed on her again. Though she had never told him the full tale, he knew something of why she had left the forest. When he had found her there, a young girl who wished to flee her home, she had shown him the bruises her father used to leave upon her body. That was what had prompted him to bring her in the first place. He had to know she had little reason to return, not like Chet, whose father loved him, and who had had many friends in the village besides.
He is definitely a hick.
But still, Lauren remembered some folk from her childhood with fondness, though it seemed many years since she had seen them last. Mayhap Chet was right. Mayhap they could warn the village and let them escape. But to where? She did not know, but anywhere had to be better than a kingdom overrun by Shades. She met Zane's gaze defiantly. Yes, we will make for the coast by way of the birchwood. Rest, all of you. We ride again at first light. Zane glowered at her. I will stand the first watch. She held his gaze a moment longer, before she turned to fetch her bedroll from Midnight's saddle.
Dun, dun, dun! Yes, exactly. Chet and most of the people in Lauren's village are firmly in Hicksville, and Lauren, due to years of daydreaming and learning about the outside world and all that sort of thing, is more of a southern belle.
Turn his eyes.
Ah.
Chapter 8.
This is Adobe Audition. Oh. Quick bathroom while I load this file. Later, Dread. Good to see you. She has a case of the vapors. I do declare. What will my chaperone think? Father never let me out of doors before today. I was never permitted a looking glass in the house for fear of vanity. uh... Oh, so it's going to be one of those days. Okay, okay. You know, two can play at this game. I can clip you right back. I can't. That's not a thing.
Blade.
Chapter 9.
Whoa, what? No. What? Why? Why do you sound like that?
Chapter 9. Dawn broke gray and cold, with the sun struggling to pierce the clouds and find them beneath the trees. Lauren felt a sore spot. Dawn broke gray and cold. Dawn broke gray and cold, with the sun Dawn broke gray and cold. Dawn broke gray and cold, with the sun struggling to pierce the clouds and find them beneath the trees. Lauren felt a sore spot under her shoulder. After days spent in Mag's... Dawn broke gray and cold. Chapter 9.
What is that? It's like it was forced mono and out of phase.
Chapter 9. Dawn broke gray and cold, with the sun struggling to pierce the clouds and find them beneath the trees. Lauren felt a sore spot under her shoulder. After days spent in Mag's inn, which was comfortable if plain, the forest floor was an unpleasant reminder of life on the road. "Do you think it will rain?" said Annis, who had already awoken. She was looking up at the clouds. "No," said Chet. "The air is not right, and this part..." "It gave us plenty in the Great Rocks," said Jem. "Mountains are different," said Lauren. "This is the birchwood." Chapter 16. Chapter 16. The days afterwards passed.
Okay, so it is something that's particular to that session. Oh boy. Alright, I gotta message the editor. I wonder if it's only chapter 9.
Chapter 10.
No.
They set off soon afterwards, mounting their horses and heading east through the tree. Chapter 11.
Yeah, it seems to be the whole session.
Chapter 12. They roused. He remembered Chet's hearing, the other end of it invisible in the dimming twilight. Come with me. It could be dangerous. Of the forest and down into the caves or dark thoughts.
Yeah. Okay, let's get this done. Ah! Okay, gotta jump to 16 because the editor has to fix chapters 9 through 15, which is irritating, but what you gonna do?
Chapter 16. The days afterwards passed like bitter months of winter, cold, reluctant, and lingering in the mind long after passing. No one spoke often, nor laughed, nor told any jokes, for the memories of the village in the forest plagued them. They slept only a few hours at a time, when neither the sun nor the moons were there to guide their way. Often as they pressed on, their heads would sag against their chests for a moment, only to snap upward at a jostle in the road. Zane's condition was growing slowly worse, and though Lauren tried not to pay it too much mind, Zane's condition was growing slowly worse. Road. Zane's condition was growing slowly worse, and though Lauren tried not to pay it too much mind, she could not ignore it entirely. Fortunately, it was not as bad as it had been in the Great Rocks. Then he had been driven to madness, half the time forgetting who and madness. half the time forgetting who and where he was, and the other half filled with a murderous rage that he sought to half filled with a and the other half filled with a murderous rage that he raged rage that he sought to unleash upon Lauren and the others. This was more of a quiet wasting away, a slow breaking down of a slow a slow breaking down of his body. Lauren often saw him wincing as he dismounted, and his skin had begun to bruise easily at even a light touch. But he spoke no word of complaint, and always matched the pace Lauren set, and so she kept her thoughts on the road ahead. 5 days after they found the village slaughtered in the birchwood, they came at last out the northern side of the forest and down into the kingdom of Dorsey. Early on that day, Lauren noticed that the trees were sparser and shorter, and seemed less hardy than those in the south. The ground turned from soft loam and grass to a brown and brittle dirt, which kicked up much dust that took long to settle. Dorsey itself, when they reached it, was much the same. The land was not quite mountainous, but rolling and hilly as far as the eye could see, browner than it was green. What vegetation there was came in small, scrubby bushes and spindly trees that sucked what water they could from the earth. To the west and to the south, Dorsey is much like Selvan, said Zane, but here it is half a desert. The land may be tilled, but not easy, and so the people are as hard and stubborn as the land upon which they feed themselves. Still, adversity has made them somewhat kinder than their western and southern brethren, who, like many fat and happy people, begin to turn their eyes outward to what more they can claim for their own. I know much of Dortian greed, said Lauren. It is what brings them to war with Selvan over and over again. Chet nodded firmly. You speak with many dramatics and little truth, said Annis, rolling her eyes. Why, I have met many merchants from Dorsey, and members of the Dortian royal family, and they were no more or less crafty than any other inhabitants of the High King's seat, those from Selvan included. You are a gem among women, Lauren, and you seem a decent enough fellow, Chet. But you must know that not all people of your kingdom are so good and kind-hearted as you. It is no less foolish to claim great knowledge of all people when you have spent all your life upon the seat, said Zane. It could be said, rather, that the wealthy and the powerful are much the same from one kingdom to the next, though the people they rule may vary wildly. But this is idle philosophy, and we have little time for it. Let us press on. Now they were in open territory, and a land about which Lauren knew little. Zane took to guiding them, for as he told them, he had traveled Dorsey well as a young man. Do not tell me you hail from this kingdom, said Annis in surprise. It is hard to say where I hail from, said Zane, especially since my first answer would have been the seat until recently, and they will no longer claim me as their own. But as for where I was born, that is Wadeland to the east, though I left it as a young boy when my parents found I had the gift of elementalism. And how did they find that out? Said Jem, leaning forwards with interest. Were you bandying about the horses one day when you accidentally set the stable boy on fire? Zane chuckled. An odd sound from him these days, and one Lauren welcomed. Nothing so crude as that. Though I can hardly blame you for thinking so, since you are a commoner, and know little of the practices of the wealthy. When a child of royalty nears his 6th year, he is required by law to see a representative of the Academy. Wealthy families, even those who are not royalty, such as my parents, pay in coin for such a representative to visit them. These men know how to test for the gift, and they put the child through a series of trials. meant to discover if any of the 4 branches have presented themselves in any strength. I took the trials, said Annis, sounding as if she were trying very hard not to boast. They found nothing. What do they do, I wonder, if a child shows the gift of more than one type of magic? That is impossible, said Zane. Wizards are gifted with only one, even the most powerful among us. With those words, he fixed Lauren with a look. She thought, as he must be thinking, of the Life Mage and the Necromancer, and the 2 branches of magic that had lay hidden for centuries. How did the wizards of the Academy detect them, if they even could? She doubted if they would ever know.
Dun dun dun. Dun dun dun.
Chapter 16. The days afterwards passed. Chapter 17. They made camp on the wide plains of Dorsey that night. They found a crag of a hill in the midst of the flatlands, and settled down to the north of it so that it might block the light of their campfire from anyone who would follow them out of the birchwood. Lauren knew there might be shades in Dorsey already, and they might be seen from the west or north, but as they had seen no sign of their pursuers for days, the warmth of the fire seemed worth the risk. Chet took the first watch. Lauren had half expected Zane to volunteer, as he so often did now, but the wizard looked weary and worn. Almost as soon as they had built a fire, he curled up in his bedroll and slept. Lauren hoped that was a hopeful sign. When he had suffered from the Magestone sickness in the Great Rocks, he had gone through a time of great anguish and pain, followed by a bone-deep exhaustion. If he had come to that point already, it meant his recovery from now on would be less taxing. Lauren's thoughts were still much occupied with their fight against the shades in the birchwood, and the village full of corpses, and she feared that sleep might well elude her. But it was a warm night for autumn, and the soft glow of the fire quickly lulled her off to a deep slumber, one without dreams or dark thoughts. She woke feeling refreshed, more so than she had in all the many miles of their journey since Northwood, and as relaxed as if she had spent the night on one of Mag's softest mattresses. Then she saw the moons in the sky above her, and realized with a start that it was still the middle of the night. She looked about in confusion. Had a noise woken her? If so, it was gone now. Only dying embers remained of their fire, and the others were all curled in their blankets. The world was silent, save a faint whisper on the air and far-off birdsong. When she lifted her head, she saw Chet sitting by a rock near the edge of their camp. His head was bent down into his chest in slumber, and her mouth twisted in annoyance. It was foolish, and she would have words with him, but in the morning. For now, she would simply take the watch and let him sleep. They were all of them weary. But when she rose, she saw and she would have words with him, but in the morning. For now, she would simply take the watch and let him sleep. Take the watch and let him sleep. They were all of them weary. But when she rose, she saw the elves. There were 6 of them, standing glowing in the starlight, only a few paces away from her sleeping friends.
Her sleeping friends.
Away from her sleeping friends. She knew them at once from the tales she had heard all her life. Those tales were told in quiet whispers in the night, for it was said that to speak of the creatures too often was to invite their wrath. The stories always came from survivors, of which there were precious few. When humans came upon elves in the 9 lands, more often than not, they did not survive to speak of it. They were all of different hues, but shared white clothing and the same raven-black hair, which hung long, down to the smalls of their backs, wafting gently with every movement. They wore no armor and carried no weapons, clad only in the white robes, the edges of which frilled and floated as though underwater. Their eyes were as pale as their clothing, a thin and ghostly gossamer with no pupils or irises, so that it was hard to tell where they were looking. Except that they were looking at Lauren, and somehow, in the deepest part of her soul, she knew it. She was frozen, unable to move so much as a muscle. What should she do? What could she do? Her first thought was to rouse the others, to get to the horses as quickly as they could and ride for their lives. They were powerless if the elves should choose to harm them. Even Zane, were he at the height of his power, and he was far from that now. Elves could not be reasoned with. They could not be talked out of slaughter if that was their intent. Indeed, so far as Lauren knew, no one had ever spoken to elves, nor knew the words that they used. But she and her friends could not run. Not now. They could never move fast enough. Even if Lauren left the others to save herself, the elves could be upon her in an instant. They would kill her and all the rest of them, if that was their whim. And she could do nothing to stop it. A thought came into her mind. The dagger. It was on her belt. She never removed it, even when she slept. But she immediately dismissed that furtive instinct, for it was ridiculous. Mighty knights and kings had tried to battle elves, but none ever survived. What could such a tiny knife do against them? The dagger. This time the thought came more insistent, like a shout in her mind. And with a start, Lauren realized that the idea was not her own. The elves had given it to her. She studied them. They had not shifted so much as a muscle. Only their clothing and their hair moved, wafting gently as though in a breeze, though the night held no wind. They had not spoken. The words had come directly from their minds to her own. Lauren reached for her waist, desperately hoping that this was not a terrible mistake. If they thought she meant to fight them, they would kill her for certain. As quickly as she could, she drew the dagger and then flipped it about, holding it by the blade, hilt forwards. One tentative step she took towards them, then another. When she was a few paces away, she knelt and placed the dagger on the ground. Then they moved at last, or at least one of them did. It stepped away from the others and came forwards, and watching the movement of its limbs was like watching a courtly dancer. Was like watching the movement of its limbs was like watching a courtly dancer. The elf was pure grace and ease, and at the same time it imparted a terrifying power. It held out a hand, its fingers curled as though around the dagger's hilt. Lauren pictured that hand circling her throat, and she quailed with fear. Then the dagger appeared, as if from nowhere, in the elf's hand. If it had reached for the blade, or moved it with some magic, Lauren had not seen it. One moment the dagger was not there, and then it was. The elf turned to the others and lifted the dagger. It flashed in the light of both moons, which were directly overhead, and Lauren thought she saw the silver glow of the elves reflected in its steel as well. And then the elves began to sing. Lauren burst into tears. Her knees failed her, and she fell to the ground in a heap. She buried her face in her hands, wailing, giving no heed to the sound of her voice or whether it might wake the others. The sound of the song was too beautiful, incomprehensible. Others, the sound... The others, the sound of... Others, the sound of the song was too... The sound of the song was too beautiful, incomprehensible, for it was sung in no tongue she had ever heard. Soul-shattering, for Lauren felt that when it ended its grace would break her mind and leave her wishing always to hear it again. She felt as though it were transforming her from the inside out, changing something deep within her, something beyond explanation or hope of memory. The song stopped. Lauren lay there, still a wreck, aching to hear just one more note. And then, though they had sung to the dagger in chorus, as if in reverence, the elf took the blade by the tip and dropped it in the dirt. The dagger. The thought came to her again, and this time Lauren knew it for the elf's. She struggled to hands and knees. The thought of standing seemed more than her body could bear. Slowly she crawled forwards, searching the ground for the blade. But she was too far beyond the fire, and her eyes were filled with tears besides, and she could not find it. A hand gripped her shoulder, and where it touched her she felt an incredible warmth. It was not a warmth of the body, but of the soul, and where it ran through her it filled her with hope and courage. But the hand was uncaring, uncompromising, and it lifted her to her feet without waiting for her to act. She found herself standing before the elf, looking into its gossamer white eyes, and then she realized that the glow in those eyes was the same glow she saw in Zane whenever he reached for his magic. This is the end, she thought. The elf would kill her now, for she had moved too slowly. She only hoped it would... Too slowly. She only hoped it would leave the others be. It would leave the others be. The dagger, came the thought, impatient. The elf was holding it now, its hilt towards her. She found her hand wrapped around the hilt, though she had not meant to move it. The elf released the blade, and then her shoulder, and the world seemed darker and more horrible than it had before she felt its touch. The stones. And now in her mind's eye she saw the mage stones, the small packet wrapped in brown cloth that rested in one of the pockets of her cloak. "What?" she said out loud. She caught a movement, just the barest twitch of a muscle in the elf's jaw. Then it seized her again. Lauren wanted to burst out in hysterical laughter at the feeling of it, the power and the joy, but the elf, uncaring, reached into her cloak and seized the packet. From the brown cloth it drew one of the stones, and then broke it in half to hold before her eyes. The stones. Lauren took the stone between thumb and forefinger, gingerly, and in her mind's eye she saw herself putting the stone in her mouth, crunching down upon it and swallowing the dust. Her eyes widened with fear, and she thought of Zane. "No," she stammered. "I cannot." The elf seized her throat. She felt its skin upon her own, no longer dampened by the cloth that had protected her when it took her shoulder. Her mind threatened to collapse upon itself. She saw herself, all of herself, the bone and sinew and flesh beneath the skin, and the bright white light at the center of it all. But it was all of it distorted and misshapen, turned about so that she could see every angle of it at once. And from each part Lauren saw what looked like a thin thread, a silvery wisp of something that ran off back and forth in all directions, in every direction at once and none of them, and through time as quickly as through the many leagues they had traveled and would travel still. With the sight came knowing, and she knew that she beheld the skeins of time laid out before and behind her, and all of the many twists and turns that had led her to where she stood now. And farther, beyond the place where the camp lay, she saw those threads touching others, one at a time, and then great clusters all in a group, and twisting endlessly around each other in a pattern that covered all the 9 lands. The twisted, broken thing that was Lauren's body twitched, and from its mouth croaked the words, I cannot. Then the elf placed the mage stone in her mouth and released her, and the world was as it had always been. Lauren's was as it had always and the world was as it had always been. Lauren swallowed hard on instinct, and she felt the half-mage stone slide down her throat. She felt the half-mage stone slide down her throat unbroken. She gasped, for she felt it creeping through her. She thought it might be like a black corruption, or some great sickness sliding through her veins. But it was nothing so terrible. It was a sharpening. Her mind had been a dull blade all her life, and the mage stone slid through her like a whetstone, honing its edge. With a start, she realized she could see all the world around her, clearly as if it were day, except that she could see better. Around her, clearly as if it were day, except that she could see better now. She saw the pores on blades of grass, and the threads that made up Jem's bedroll, and the hairs that clung stubbornly to Zane's thinning scalp. Although it was a poor kind of sight next to the vision of the elves, this was something her mind could comprehend, and she found it beautiful. She looked at the elves in wonder, and the glow that poured from them seemed thrice as lovely as before. But now their eyes were black, black like Zane's when he had cast Darkfire, and she quailed under their gaze. The Nightblade, came the thought in her mind, the one who walks with death. Then their eyes turned from her. All of them looked skyward, to where the moons continued their long path across the sky, west towards the horizon where they would finally set. As one, the elves turned, though Lauren did not see their feet move, and they began to wander off into the west. Back and forth they strayed, but always westerly, and though they did not seem to hurry, they were out of sight beyond the horizon in what seemed like no time at all. When the last glow of their presence faded from sight, Lauren went suddenly weak and fell to the grass again. She still felt the glamour of their presence in her mind, but without it there to sustain her, she was exhausted. What was more, the night vision of the mage stones had faded. The world was black around her again, black save for the silver moon's light, a light she already knew would remind her, for the rest of her days, of the elves. At the sound of her dropping to the ground, Chet started awake where he sat against the rock. His head jerked, his eyes blinking furiously, and then he beheld her. Look! The rock. His head jerked, his eyes blinking furiously. eyes blinking furiously, and then he beheld her. "Lauren," he said. He tried to rise, but he was still groggy and nearly toppled over. "I fell asleep. The sky above cursed me. I'm sorry. I hardly thought myself tired, but then a deep weariness overcame me, as though... What is the matter?" She looked at him and only then realized that tears still trickled down her face, leaking from the corners of her eyes to leave their tracks upon her cheeks. Hastily she wiped at them with her sleeve. "Nothing," she said. "Nothing. Go, sleep in earnest. I will take the watch." "I've slept enough. Too much, it seems." He still looked worried, and he peered at her in the night as though trying to read her expression. "I can keep the watch, for a while longer at any rate." "No, I cannot sleep now. Rest yourself. I wish to be alone for a while." She could tell he was still worried, for he did not look away from her for quite a while. But he did not argue, only turned and went to his bedroll. Soon he was asleep like the rest, and Lauren marked that Jem's snores had resumed, loud as ever. Lauren took the other half of the mage stone the elf had fed her. She put it between her lips and bit down, and then swallowed, though her stomach clenched with fear to do so. But the mage stone went down the same as last time. Only now, she saw nothing, and the night was dark as ever. Brow furrowing, she reached into her cloak for the mage stone packet again. But in reaching for it, her hand brushed against the dagger's hilt once more. The night sprang into stark daylight, a vision beyond vision, where even the horizon seemed near. Her hand jerked back in surprise, and the vision vanished. She stared at the dagger a moment. Then she took it again, and could see as bright as day. Jordell had told her that her dagger held many magics, and one day he would teach them to her. He had died before he could teach her this one. But had he meant to teach it to her in the first place? Did he know the dagger held this power? Or was it some secret of the elves? Or had Jordell known, but withheld it because of the mage stones? Would they act on Lauren the same way they had acted on Zane? That thought came with its own terrors, and she shoved the mage stones as deep in her pocket as she could. Then she pulled them out and stood, intending to throw them into the darkness. But at the last second, she stopped. Mayhap she was wrong. Mayhap the mage stones would have no ill effects if she was not a mage. Mayhap the dagger itself protected her. She could not know, not at least for a while yet, and until she knew, it seemed foolish to throw away such a great amount of wealth, and a great amount of power. Lauren put the mage stones back in her cloak, and leaned against the rock once more. She put her hand on the dagger, then removed it, over and over again, watching the world turn from night to day each time. After a time, the vision faded, and she saw nothing more with the dagger in hand than she did without. But her thoughts went on wild journeys long afterward, recalling all she had seen when the elf touched her, and the words it had put into her mind. Nightblade, the one who walks with death. Those words stayed with her the longest. Chapter 17. Chapter 18. Lauren woke Chet an hour before dawn, when the sky was just beginning to gray. He roused slowly, but when he moved to wake the others, she stopped him. "Come with me," she said. "I have something to tell you, and I would not tell the others. Not yet, at any rate. Come." He did as she asked, though she could see the questions in his eyes. Lauren led him up the side of the hill until they sat on a flat shelf in its northwest side. From there they could see the camp down below, and the open plains for many leagues to the north and west. All the land was empty as far as they could see, though Lauren wondered if she would see anything different if she was to eat another magestone. But that was something she was not yet ready to test. Lauren told Chet everything that had happened, as best she could remember it, for already the memory had begun to fade, a gray and hazy thing like a dream half remembered. But all she had to do was recall the elves' black eyes when she had eaten the magestones, and she knew with certainty that they had been real. When she first mentioned them, Chet went white as the elves' robes had been, and made the sign of the plow over his heart. Lauren doubted that would have helped, for she guessed that the elves cared little for such superstitions. She did not tell him of the magestones, for she had never told him that she still had a packet of them with her, but she told him all the rest of it, and how it had felt when the elf touched her, which she said was because she had not fetched the dagger quickly enough. By the time she finished her tale, Chet was looking down at the ground between his feet in thought. Lauren waited a while, but when he still said nothing, she began to feel uncomfortable. "You must promise not to tell the others," she said. He looked up in surprise. "Why not?" She paused, for in truth she had not thought over much about it. She only knew she did not want to tell them. "I am not certain. Only it feels like something that was for me and me alone." He chuckled. "Why tell me, then?" "I had to tell someone," she said, sighing. "The memory fades even now, against my wishes. I was terrified for every moment of it and feared that we might all of us be killed where we lay. Yet at the same time, it was beautiful, like something from one of Bracken's tales, and I would not be the only one to know it happened. And somehow, I feel that if I were to tell them, they might not believe me." "I believe you," he said quietly. "I hoped you would. Come, we have rested long enough and should put as many leagues behind us as we can." They went down the hill again and woke the others. But when Lauren shook Zane awake, his gaze locked with hers. "What happened to you?" he said, eyes wide with wonder. "What?" she said, feeling a chill run down her spine. "Nothing." "Your eyes. Something is different about them," he said slowly. He sat up. Said slowly. He sat up straighter and peered at her more intently. "Something I feel I should recognize, but I cannot." Lauren swallowed and thought she could feel Chet's eyes on her back. "Nothing," she said. "Mayhap it is a symptom of the magestone sickness." Zane stared a moment longer without answering. Then he sighed and turned away. "Mayhap. I am weary and feel as if I have hardly slept a wink." Slept. "Mayhap. I am weary and feel as if I have hardly slept a wink." When she turned, Lauren saw that Chet was indeed looking at her with worry, but she smiled at him, and he looked away, and they readied for the day's travel. Readied for the day's travel. The ride went swiftly. They turned their horses due east around midday, for the land seemed flat and easy, while to the north and south it was rocky and harsh. 3 more days they rode this way, and each night Lauren went to sleep thinking of the elves, and woke to memories of their faces in the moon's light. The party gave a wide berth to any villages or farms they spied from afar. Doubtless someone would mark their passing, but they wanted to leave as little information in their wake as they could. On the 4th day, Lauren found Zane studying their saddlebags with worry. Her earlier optimism about his recovery seemed to have been justified, for he was slowly regaining his strength. But now he was looking at their supplies and seemed displeased. "We do not have enough to reach the coast," said Zane. "We thought we might not." "That worry was far off when we were still in the birchwood. Now it presses close. I would counsel that we should stop at the next village we see. Only I fear that if the shades still follow us, it could freshen the trail." "We have seen neither hide nor hair of them for days now," said Jem, piping up from behind Annis on their horse. "And I would welcome a change from the endless, unbroken brown of this kingdom, and the wilting scrub brush that covers its landscape." He had taken to complaining day and night about Dorsey, never tiring of pointing out its flaws when compared to the lush green of Selvin, until Lauren had to grit her teeth to keep from cuffing him. "He is right, Lauren," said Annis, "and I try not to complain, but I too would welcome a stop. This road is lonely and dirty and boring." "Very well," said Lauren. "We shall rest in the next town we see. Mayhap we will even spend the night in an inn." "It will seem poor compared to Mag's," said Chet quietly. They all rode in silence for some time after that. They did not have to wait long, for later that afternoon they saw a small cluster of brown houses near the horizon. Lauren stowed her black cloak in the saddlebag, for it was far too distinctive. But despite misgivings about the wisdom of such a stop, Lauren found herself nudging a bit more speed out of midnight. The mare seemed to catch her mood. The town sat on a small stream that headed to the northeast, and likely ran all the way to the ocean many leagues away. The sun was nearing the horizon as they reached the place. From a ways off they saw some folk at the town's western end, waiting, or so it seemed. But once they got close enough to be seen more clearly, the villagers turned and shuffled off back to their homes. As they left, Lauren saw weapons in their hands, staves and simple cudgels, no blades or spears. It gave her an unquiet feeling. "Did anyone else find that odd?" Chet said, and she knew he had seen the same thing. "Again you forget that we are in Dorsey now," said Zane. "Villages and towns cannot afford to be so friendly as in Selvin, and we would not do well to mention it either, for that and your voices would mark us as foreigners." The village was a small place, but a road ran through it parallel to the river, and there was an inn at the southwestern end. They caught a few glances as they rode past the homes, but the villagers seemed filled with curiosity rather than suspicion. The inn was low and squat, only a single story high, with the rooms around the outside of the building and all their doors leading straight to the common room at the center. A fat and bearded innkeeper greeted them cordially at the door. "Evening, good folk," he said. "You will need rooms for the night, I imagine." "We will," said Lauren, "and stalls for the horses, if you have the room." "That we do, though you have a couple of fine steeds there. Likely they're used to finer quarters than ours." Annis smiled down at him. "We value hospitality more than feather pillows, and yours seems in plentiful supply, good sir." The man grinned wide at that, and he gave Lauren a low bow. "Always a kindness to have guests of such fair words under our roof. My boy Ham will take your steeds. Get yourselves inside for a pint." They dismounted, and Lauren raised a questioning eyebrow. Annis smiled, suddenly shy. "Dorshans hold hospitality as a high virtue, and disdain finery, which they see as unnecessary luxury, she said. Or so I was taught upon the seat. Mayhap you should do all our talking while we are here, said Chet. He grinned wide enough to split his head open. Annis ducked her head, cheeks darkening with embarrassment. They found a table inside, and soon the innkeeper came personally to bring them supper. After they had eaten for a while and had drunk of his ale, which was fine enough, though nowhere near so good as Mag's, he asked if he might sit with them for a time, and they happily obliged. He introduced himself as Crastus, and did not ask for their names in return, though they had prepared false ones. "Where might you be headed, if my asking is no discourtesy, I mean?" he said, once he had settled down and taken a swig from his mug. "Southeast, for the seat," said Lauren, for they had discussed this story before they entered the town. "Bridget here has a cousin in a courtly position who means to take her for a handmaiden. We are friends of her father's, and promised to see her safely to her destination." "I have family north and west of here," said Crastus. "From where do you hail? Mayhap I know the place." "It is only a tiny village, many leagues north of the King's Road and deep within Feldemar," said Lauren smoothly. "Too small a place to warrant a name." "Like our own village," said Crastus. "Do you know the family Menet? They are my kin, and are from around about those parts." "Menet?" said Lauren, Jem, and Chet all at once. Annis's eyes widened, and she pursed her lips. With a quiet look to Lauren, she seemed to urge them all to silence. "I have met many Menets through my father, though it pains me to say I cannot remember their names," she said. "You must forgive my friends their surprise. They are travelers, as you can plainly hear by their tone, and not from Dorsey by birth." At that, Crastus gave them all sharp looks. "I should say not. Were I a wagering man, I would lay a gold weight that you three come from Selvin. The dark fellow there has hardly said a word, so I would make no guess as to him." "From Selvin stock, but born in Feldemar," said Annis, cutting off Jem, who had begun to open his mouth. Lauren kicked the boy under the table. "And certainly they hold no truck with that kingdom now, what with the goings-on in Welmont." Crastus eyed them a moment more, but then he shrugged and went to his mug again. It is no worry of mine. As long as the fighting stays far, far away, I care nothing for it. Though you might wish to keep your words to yourselves, for some hold more tightly to their kingly bonds. More tightly, I would say, than seems reasonable." "Thank you for the warning," said Lauren. "Is that why we saw some men waiting for us when we rode in, bearing weapons?" "No, that is something else entire," said Crastus, leaning in to speak in a hushed voice. "Some say there have been elves sighted west of here." The others' eyes all widened, all but Lauren, who tried to keep her face calm. From the corner of her eye she saw Chet looking at her. "Elves," said Jem, giddy. "Truly." "I would rid myself of that smile if I were you, boy," said Crastus. "Elves are no playthings for children such as yourself." "I have heard they are beautiful, though, to be certain, few enough have seen them and lived to describe it," said Jem. He had done nothing to follow the innkeeper's advice, for his smile remained. "Aye, and that is because they will kill you without a second thought," said Crastus. "I pray they stay far, far away from here, that I do." Lauren cleared her throat and took another bite of her dinner. She had become aware that Zane, too, was looking at her now, and his brow had furrowed in thought. The conversation turned to other things, and soon Lauren wrestled them all from their tables to go into town and get the supplies they had come for. Food they bought, and oats for the horses, and from the river they filled their waterskins to bursting. All these they put in their room, ready to be packed and loaded in the morning. Night had fallen by then, and they met back in the common room for a drink before bed. Crastus joined them once more, and began to tell them a story of a time the King of Dorsey himself had come through the town, and tried Crastus's ale and proclaimed it the best he had had in years. The innkeeper was a fair tale-spinner, better at it than any rate than his ale was to drink, and Lauren was leaning back in her chair and drink, and to drink, and Lauren was leaning back in her chair enjoying the story when a man poked his head in the front door and gave a sharp whistle. Some men rose from their seats and moved to the door outside. "What is that?" said Zane, eyes suddenly sharp. "Another party spotted coming in," said Crastus. "Probably just more travelers like yourselves, but half these boys will go and fetch their weapons expecting elves. As though swords would help him if indeed those demons decided to put our town to the torch." He went on with his story, but Lauren gave Chet a worried look. It might be more travelers, or it might indeed be the elves. What if Lauren had done something wrong since they saw her last? Something she could not understand? Or what if it was the shades? From the look in his eyes, Chet seemed to understand something of her worry. "You will forgive me, Crastus, but I think I shall take a stroll for the night air," she said, standing from her chair. "I have had more of your fine ale than is good for my head, and I wish tomorrow's ride to be a pleasant one." Crastus looked somewhat miffed that she would miss the end of his story, but he waved them off, and she and Chet walked into the darkness. Quickly they made their way through the city streets to the west, and soon came to the edge of the town. There stood many of the villagers, more than had waited for them when they came riding in, and all of them held their weapons at the ready. Lauren felt her pulse quicken, but she could not see beyond them yet. Grabbing Chet's sleeve, she pulled him to the side, moving around the men so she could see into the west. She did not see elves, or at least not the silvery glow she had seen from them before. At first, she saw only torches, like a dozen orange eyes coming at them through the darkness. When the torches neared, she finally saw the figures carrying them, and then blanched, for they were soldiers on horseback, wearing armor and clothing of blue and gray.
Dun, dun, dun! All right, Stram. I have to go take care of some things this fine day.
The sun.
No.
Chapter 18.
Chapter 18. But that is going to be the end of my afternoon stream today. I will be resuming streaming tomorrow morning, but for now, I have some errands to run about and take care of. Oh, thanks so much for coming and hanging out. Who is streaming right now that I want to toss a host to? Nobody. It's unfortunate. Well, there you go. I will simply depart then and be back tomorrow morning with more writing of the next book. Thanks for hanging. Catch you next time. Bye!